You're listening to the Basketball Lab podcast with your hosts Mark Shannon, Mark Clark, and Marco Corona. They'll discuss all the top news and stories from around the basketball world while giving their opinion and insight. Now, here are your hosts.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Basketball Lab podcast. I'm your host, Mark Shannon, and once again, I'm joined remotely by my co-host, Marco Corona. What's going on?
What up?
What up?
Not much. Same old. I don't know what day it is, but it doesn't matter.
Right. Right. It's almost Friday. You know, it's a Friday Junior.
Oh, is it?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
it
almost
felt like
Friday.
a Wednesday.
Right. It felt like a Wednesday. You know, the other day went by like. The other day it felt like it was going by like, like quicksand. It was going so slow. Like the time, man. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, I know. Crazy.
Right. It's being locked up and stuck in these in the house, not being able to do anything. Right. That's what it is.
I feel like the Raptors in Tampa, man. It's like stuck in quicksand. And it's like sometimes it's going too fast and sometimes it's going nowhere.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I managed to get a Tampa reference in there.
But basketball, like you said prior to this, basketball never sleeps. It's always going. There's always something to talk about. And, there was a few things that came out this week that gave us something to talk about. Right?
Yeah.
There's a guy by the name of Scott Brooks, their coach of the Washington Wizards, who kind of made a very out there statement. We'll get into that a little bit later, but a very out there statement where it caught a lot of attention. A lot of people were like, kind of what?
Nice tease. I see what you did there.
Right.
Okay.
But I also classified on our TikTok, I put one up there and it was a segment. He didn't say that, did he? Like, I was kind of one of those segments, he didn't say that, did he? Like Price is Right. Jeopardy. You know what I mean? Like one of those ones, but.
Right.
But yeah, like we're almost at the playoffs, right? There's a lot of talk about playoffs and all that stuff. But something came out the other day, I think it was yesterday, about coaches on the hot seat. Right? There's a list of, I think, 5 guys that are technically on the hot seat as of right now.
Yeah.
We've got Terry Stotts from the Portland Trail Blazers. We've got Mike Budenholzer from the Milwaukee Bucks, who we last week said were a sleeper team or were being slept on, right?
Yeah. And then somebody said, nah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Ironically enough.
And then not to be thing, but they went out and won 3 games against top 5 opponents in the last 4 days, right?
Must have been listening to our podcast. Thanks.
Literally. But you got Nate Bjorkgren from the Indiana Pacers, first-year head coach. He's on the hot seat.
That came out of nowhere.
Right? It was kind of weird because it wasn't expected because like I said, he's a first-year coach. He kind of came in there. He hasn't really had the experience as a head coach. But Indiana made the playoffs last year. There was a lot of pressure in terms of that situation, right, with the talent they have. And then the next one, you got Luke Walton from the Sacramento Kings.
But in fairness, when isn't any coach in Sacramento in the hot seat?
Yeah, when aren't they? Right, you're right. So it makes
that's an awful franchise.
Right, it's absolutely horrible. And
I bet you he leaked the story so he can get his ass fired.
It could be worse. He could be coaching Minnesota Timberwolves, right? But
another ex-Raptor there.
Yeah. Exactly. And the last one is Scott Brooks from the Washington Wizards. Right. So we got that list right on of people on the hot seat. Obviously, I want to know who you think out of that list. Who you think is really, really on the hot seat?
You know what? I'm going to go 2 extremes, and I'm going to answer your question in 2 answers, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The first one to me is actually Scott Brooks, because he's got Bradley Beal and he's got Russell Westbrook, and we'll get into Russell a little bit later, so stay tuned. So it's not like this is a lottery team. I didn't have the Wizards in my top 4 or anything like that. I believe I had them, sort of 6 and under. But based on the fact that they have 2, can we say elite? 2 at least considered elite players, they should be better than fighting for the playoff or the play-in lives, right? That's the word of the day, right? Play-in. So just based on that, again, this team has gone through some weird stretches where they looked really, really bad defensively.
Yeah.
There's no problem in scoring. Like it's obvious. The issue is not offensive. The issue is they can't defend.
Yeah.
And they've gone through stretches that they look like they can beat the shit out of anybody. Pardon my language, but it's a podcast, right? And then the second one, I guess, ironically enough, is Budenholzer. Because at the end of the day, this team has gone through a stretch of regular season success consistently, 50-plus wins, pretty much every year other than probably this year because they won't get there because of the shortened season, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But eventually you have to win. They brought him in there to bring a championship, and the resume is there. And the resume doesn't necessarily, the resume is missing a championship. This sort of looks like Atlanta 2.0, where those teams in Atlanta were really, really good. 60-game winning seasons consistently. And they get to the playoffs is buckets. Now, you also have a 2-time reigning MVP, Defensive Player of the Year. They've added a lot of pieces. Let's say what you want to say about this team, about what they've added. There was a significant roster turnover to take this team to the promised land, right? They got Kawhi the 1 year, right? And last year things didn't work out, so eventually things have to change. So to me, Scotty Brooks, even though I doubt that they'll make a change because of the next guy that we'll talk about, I don't know if you have money on this, because this is Scotty Brooks' first year.
Yeah.
Well, right? And then Budenholzer, because if not now, when?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, you got to say Scott Brooks because the change that they made in the offseason or with Russell Westbrook coming in, that's a huge addition. You're not talking about just bringing in a couple pieces. You're bringing in arguably one of the best triple-double players in the game. He can shoot the ball in terms of score buckets. He can dish. He can also get on the boards, right? They haven't had
and he
that.
Coached him before, so it's not like this is an adjustment for him.
Exactly.
Right? That's
right?
his boy.
Exactly.
That's his boy.
Right? Exactly. That is his boy in a sense in terms of that. And they've always had Bradley Beal there, right? But they've never been able to get over that hump because they haven't had other players around him that have been consistent and played, right? John Wall was there. The first couple of years that John Wall was there and they were playing together, they were a tough team to beat, right? But John Wall got injured and things just changed. Everything, they relied on Bradley Beal, and Bradley Beal isn't a facilitator. He's a shooter, right? He's not a facilitator. He needs to be the guy that's getting the ball, catch and shoot, scoring. And we're seeing that with Russ right now, right? And how good the Washington Wizards are playing. So I think Scott Brooks is definitely there, but I think if Washington, after the start they had to start the season, are able to get into that 8th spot, I think they're a game and a half back of the 8th spot right now. They're definitely more than likely going to be in a play-in game. So they've got a chance at the playoffs after starting off the season really horribly. So I think he's on the hot seat, but I think if they get in the playoffs, I think he's going to be able to sort of make that step. Mike Budenholzer.
By himself a year?
Right, exactly. By himself another year. Mike Budenholzer, on the other hand, yeah, they've had great records. They've had great playoffs. They've had all that stuff. But, a certain guy comes to mind that used to be a Toronto Raptors head coach. Won Coach of the Year. They fired him the next season, Dwayne Casey. Right? And prior to that, they were having really good seasons. You know what I mean? They had really decent seasons where they had winning records, made the playoffs. But there needs to be a change of some sort in terms of the makeup of the team in a sense, right? And usually the coach is one of those guys that change is made, right? To bring in some fresh energy, some fresh influence, like different play, voice. Right? Different voice into that locker room that may be able to get these guys and kick their ass in gear, right? But Milwaukee, again, they're a team that I think they're 3rd in the East right now, but they just beat the Brooklyn Nets. They just won the other night as well against the Lakers, I believe. But they're playing good basketball, and they're not many people are talking about them, right? So like we said, so I think depending on how they do in the playoffs, I think Budenholzer could be out of a job at the end of the season. I think it's finals or bust in Milwaukee for Budenholzer, in my opinion.
How much pull do you think? Because we've seen this in other sports and other leagues and other teams within the NBA. How much pull do you think Giannis has with Budenholzer staying or going?
I mean, obviously, star player, back-to-back MVPs, won Defensive Player of the Year there. So obviously, there's going to be some say from Giannis. But at the end of the day, Budenholzer's been there a while. He's been there a long time, right? Maybe
is this his fourth season or?
I think so. Yeah, it's his fourth or fifth season. But you need that, like you said, you need that new voice in that locker room. So Giannis might be willing to accept it a little bit more if Budenholzer's not there, right? But another guy that I think that's really on the hot seat is Terry Stotts in Portland.
Wow.
Right? I think you're talking about a team that's got Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, there's Joseph Nurkic. They had a really good team this year.
They added Norm Powell.
Right, they added Norm Powell. They have Enes Kanter's been playing well, playing some good basketball. They got a good team out there. And Terry Stotts just hasn't been able to get it done with that team. And I don't know if it's coach or if somebody needs to move in order to bring another voice or some different play to that team, but they're not getting it done. And it's sad to see because Damian Lillard is arguably a top 5 point guard in this league right now, right? And it's unfortunate that he's not in the playoffs year after year and not in the Western Conference semifinals, the Western Conference finals, right? He's not making any runs at the playoffs because he just doesn't have the team around him. And I thought this year would have been the year that they had that team around them because they added guys like they had Gary Trent and they had and Enes Kanter they added. They have Carmelo Anthony on the roster. They have CJ McCollum, Joseph Nurkic. And
it's a good team.
Right? And Nurkic and McCollum went down early.
Yeah.
And Damian Lillard was there to keep the ship afloat. Right? Carrier. And now they're coming down to the late end of the season and they're going the other way. Right? So I think those two are definitely on the hot seat. We know Luke Walton. I mean, obviously, it's the Sacramento Kings. We don't know.
Fire yourself, man.
Right. We don't know if they're going to win 10, 15 games, 20 games, 25 games a season anyways, right? So
just fold. The Kings should just fold. Stop.
And
come on.
What do you think about Nate Bjorkgren in Indiana and that situation?
That to me is a weird situation because and by the way, just to go back, I did a little fact check. Budenholzer has been the coach since 2018. So the leash is a little bit short, but it's not like he took over a team that was trash. I mean, you have an elite player in Giannis. Nonetheless, the Pacers, it's a weird situation because he's a first-year coach. Sort of like, what's his name? Brooks in Washington.
Yeah.
With the exception of, I don't think I'll get an argument. There's no elite player or players in Indianapolis, right? They have good pieces. They have, Warren, who really has fallen off the map a little bit after last year's bust out year, right?
Yeah.
And my guy Sabonis, right, who I love and stuff like that. But I mean, this is a team that should be at least, in the conversation for 6, 7, 8, and yes, they're ninth right now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Right behind Charlotte, but they're not ascending; they are descending.
Yeah.
Like you can have a situation where, as we record this podcast right now, that the reason that the Toronto Raptors might get in, if they do, is if the Pacers completely fall out and then Washington goes up one spot and Pacers fall 2 down, and then the Raptors sort of sneak in that 10th spot. Just keep that in mind. Nonetheless, this team is better than they should be. There's been a lot of controversy. What's his name? The assistant coach got into a bit of a scrap the other day. He has been, correct me if I'm wrong, suspended for 1 game.
Yeah.
Right? We're not talking about a team that's in the 4th year of a run that they've completely failed and now guys are just gassed and tired of the nonsense. It's a first-year coach.
Yeah.
They went out of their way to get this guy out of Toronto. And it's funny, we were talking about the Nick Nurse tree and how this is a good fit, and they actually got off to a decent start.
Yeah.
Like they were right there.
Yeah.
Right? The Pacers are basically where the Knicks should be.
Yeah.
Or at least we thought, right? It's almost like they swap personalities. So I'm really surprised, and I hope that this is sort of a learning curve for everybody. Maybe somebody sort of acting out in the players, and maybe it's roster construction, right? Sometimes that's underlooked. But one and done for this guy, unlike Scott Brooks, this is a bit of an odd situation. Now, mind you, maybe if he gets gas, he comes back to Toronto. I don't know, maybe, right? Like, what's his name from the Patriots? That always the assistant coach there, Brady's boy.
Yeah, he goes for all the coach. I can't even remember his name now.
Yeah,
he goes for all the coaching things, and then he just doesn't, and then he doesn't go through with it. He just goes back. He's the offensive coordinator, whatever, right?
Maybe he's sort of like that sort of guy. He was in Denver before, anyways, right? Maybe that's what happens, right? But again, the indie part is really, really, really weird. I hope he keeps his job, but it doesn't look good. What do you think?
I think it's going to be tough. I mean, obviously, the end of the season will play a big factor into that, and if they could get into the playoffs, the play-in game and stuff, like tonight's going to be a big night in terms of the playoff picture, right? Because the Wizards are facing the Raptors right now. The Wizards are up by 1, or the Raptors are up by 2 at the moment. And then you got the Indiana Pacers playing the Atlanta Hawks, and they are right now up by 14, I think, on the Atlanta Hawks. And then you got the Charlotte Hornets, who are basically getting dismantled by the Chicago Bulls right now, right? So there's going to be, depending on how it all plays out, we could be seeing a 1.5 or a game lead, but Pacers over the Wizards if the Wizards end up losing to the Raptors, right? And then the Hornets lose, to the Bulls. You're talking about a one game lead over the Indiana Pacers. So they're not out of it in terms of getting into that actual playoff spot and then having to face Miami to get into the 7th seed, right? But right. It's gonna be.
By the way, we're talking about Jeff, the assistant coach for the Patriots, Josh McDaniels. By the way.
Yes, that's it. Josh McDaniels. I was thinking of the name. I knew it was a name like that, but I couldn't. I just couldn't put my finger on which one it was or what the name was. But yeah, he goes to all the interviews, and then he just goes back. Yeah. Right? It's just like, I'll take the interview, but I'm not going to leave in New England, right? But
then he had the one coaching gig in Denver, and that flopped. Right, and he went back to the Patriots. So that's why I use that reference. Anyways.
Yeah. So I want to go back to now that we've talked about all the coaches and who we think is really on the hot seat. But I want to go back to Scott Brooks a little bit. So I made reference to this.
Don't do it, man.
Right? I made reference to this at the beginning of the podcast here. He made a very, very, very bold statement, in my opinion, that Russell Westbrook is the second best point guard to ever play the game behind only Magic Johnson. I mean, that's a very bold statement. So I want to get what your take on that is. I mean,
wow. When I read that, I'm like, okay, how do I say this without disrespecting Russell Westbrook? Because take the stats away for 1 second. Russell Westbrook is a heart and soul guy. Whatever you want to say about how his shooting percentage, what's the new stat that we have? True shooting and all that BS and win shares and all that stuff that that we use nowadays. And I know you love win shares, by the way. Don't mind at me. But is he? If I'm talking about the history of basketball, and I'm taking let's just talk about the top 5 of all time in that position. You're really going to take Russell Westbrook and put him in 2nd place, right? Behind Magic Johnson. Now, at least both of us can agree, and hit us up on Twitter and Instagram, by the way, and all that stuff, good stuff, and we'll link you up with the links later. And I don't know if we'll get any disagreement on who the best point guard of all time is.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not going to say his name. All you need to know is his nickname was Magic. That's it. And we'll go from there, right? To put him 2nd, I think it's not bold. What did you use? Bold?
I said it's bold.
I use ballsy.
Yeah.
I use ballsy. Okay, because I I'm having a hard time agreeing with that. And before we got into this podcast, I think that part of it is, well, I know that part of it is that's his boy, right?
Yeah.
What is he gonna say? He's not top 10. He's not top 5. He's not top 25.
Yeah.
Not top 2. Top 3 is a bit of an excessive reach. And this is no disrespect to Russ. Again, Russell Westbrook is a very good player. How many MVPs does he have? 1, 2?
One.
Right? Triple-double machine, right? Triple-double machine. I mean, if you have him in your fantasy, congratulations. He fills the stat sheet, right? But I don't know if he, in my opinion, and this is not me showing my age and this is stuff like that, he qualifies as top 5. And you can make the argument, but first of all, his career is not done. So it's really premature to say that at this point.
Yeah.
But we sort of look over, all of a sudden, Steph Curry doesn't exist. Oscar Robertson doesn't exist. As much as I hate the guy, Isaiah Thomas, Steve Nash, 2-time MVP. Like, you're going to put him ahead of that, right? You can argue Jason Kidd, maybe he doesn't belong there. And by the way, the one guy that we didn't even talk about, actually, we talked about it before we started recording this, AI.
Yeah.
Right? And then you can talk about everybody else, where they fall, Christopher Paul, and, we kind of chuckled that Larry was in the top 30. I'm like, oh, well, who wrote this, right? It must have been a Canadian, right? I just don't know if he is top 2, in my opinion. You can make an argument within the top 10, but at least not yet. I think it's way too early, but in my opinion, it was a biased statement.
Yeah, absolutely.
He coached him. He coached him for a long time. He's got to keep his boy happy.
Yeah, and it kind of came.
Mind you, if he's on my team, I take him any day.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
He does his thing, but I don't know.
It kind of came literally after he put up a triple-double, had a really, really, really solid game, right? So, I mean, obviously, he's going to stand out there for his guy, right? He's not going to say, well, I don't really think Russ is one of the best players to ever play the game, you know what I mean? But let's be real here. He's not second best behind Magic Johnson. Yes, absolute beast out there when he's on the floor, right? He's got an MVP.
He plays hard, man.
Exactly. He plays hard, and he does it he gets on the glass, he passes the ball, right? He scores, which are referenced by all of his triple doubles. Do you know what I mean? But right, he's got an MVP. He's got he's led the league in scoring twice. He's led in games played 5 times. He's also been to the All-Star game 9 times, and he's also won 2 NBA All-Star games as well. NBA All-Star game MVPs. And he's one of the league leading, I think he's all-time leader in triple-doubles, or close to it, in terms of triple-doubles. And right now, just speaking of him now against the Raptors, he's got 9, 10, and 10. So he's literally at a triple-double, and it's just the end of the third quarter. Yeah. So it's a everyday thing. But to sit here and say he's top 2, top 3, I mean, that's a stretch and a half, right? That's a stretch, and if not even a stretch and a half, that's crazy when you talk about some of the guys that are in that I would consider my top 10 or in the top 10, like Magic. You got Oscar Robertson, Steph Curry, Isaiah Thomas, right? You mentioned Steve Nash. I mean, I love Steve Nash, but to me, I don't know if he'd be in my top 10 either.
You do? No. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, but I don't know if he would be in my top 10. Right? Yes, he won two back-to-back MVPs, but he was never able to win a championship, was never able to get right over the hump and in the Western over the Kobe Bryant hump that was there in LA. Right? So I don't know if I would ever consider him as in my top 10. I love Steve Nash. He might be 11th maybe, or right at 10, but you got John Stockton, there's Bob Cousy, there's Walt Frazier, there's a ton of guys. AI, you said, there's the Gary the Glove Payton, there's a guy still playing in Phoenix right now by the name of Chris Paul. There's a ton of talented point guards that have played this game. And yes, like I said, Russell Westbrook is probably one of the most talented in terms of being able to do a lot on both ends of the floor, right? In terms of being able to rebound, being able to get assists, all that stuff, and score the basket. So there's no questioning his abilities. But to sit here and say he's top 3, yeah, I heavily disagree with that statement from Scott Brooks. But please
Do you think that the NBA, before you ask, are we prisoners of the moment? And I find this with the NBA more than any other league, or maybe the NFL is a close second, where it's like when a guy gets in a role, all of a sudden he's an MVP, right? Like, look at this past week, and I'm not digressing, but it's sort of connected, right? Like, even who was it? Was it Ja Morant that declared himself a top 3 point guard in the league? Right, and we love Ja, right? Like, but I like, and all of a sudden, then, like 3 weeks ago when Steph was hot, he was the MVP, right? And then Joel Embiid was the MVP, and like all of a sudden, all these guys just whether it's the media driven or self promoting, right? It's like, I'm the MVP, I'm the best. Like, it's, you get hot, you're the best. But I don't understand. Like, you have to look at the entire resume when it's done.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's just weird. Like, again, I understand what Scott Brooks is doing, right? He is, pampering him to his boy. Again, people can't forget that they were together in OKC for years, right? And now they're together in Washington. So there is a bit of a bias there, and I repeat that, but I think that sometimes in the NBA we're a prisoner of the moment where, a guy gets hot and like you all of a sudden top 5, and when you get cold, you're no longer the GOAT, right? So it's like, where's the Damian Lillard talk now? Right? He's gone through a bit of a tough spell over the last few weeks. All of a sudden, it's like Damian Lillard doesn't exist, right? That's just what it is. So, I don't know. Just have to get that in there.
Like, don't get me wrong. I think Russell Westbrook is top 10, in my opinion, in terms of point guards that have ever played the game. But right now, like, and it comes, there's certain years or certain seasons where it's kind of been up and down in terms of if I even consider him a top 5 point guard in the NBA at that time, right? Because, sometimes it's like he has an inconsistent season where he's like not playing well, and it's just, at the beginning of the season he was struggling, and nobody was really talking about Russell Westbrook. Now Russell Westbrook is putting up triple doubles, right?
Just made my point.
Right? Like, nobody was talking about Russell Westbrook at the beginning. Everybody was like, where the hell is Russell Westbrook at the beginning of the season? Right?
As a matter of fact, they were blaming Russell Westbrook for the Wizards'
inconsistencies. Exactly.
Right?
And now Russell Westbrook is the hot topic, the trending topic on Twitter and Instagram.
I heard something, the flavor of the month, right?
Literally the flavor of the month right now. And everybody is on the Russell Westbrook bandwagon, even Scott Brooks. But I don't know what Scott Brooks is smoking. But if he wants to give me some of that, I'll take some over here, because then I might be saying that Kyle Lowry is the best point guard to ever play the game at that point. But, like, come on, man. It's just, I don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy to me that somebody.
It is legal, so it's.
Well, unless he's smoking other stuff, which is then we're. Right, but we're not
other podcast,
right? Brother. And we're not saying he is. We're not saying that, right? We're just throwing facts out here that what he was saying was a little bit crazy, right?
Yeah, we can go with that in many ways, but let's not.
But I want to go into a little bit of the Western Conference, right? The Western Conference is probably the most wide open it's ever been, in my opinion, in terms of the playoffs, right? We had the Lakers going into the season. They were title favorites, hands down title favorites, right? There was no questioning that. The Clippers were next. Then you had Denver, who was there, and then Dallas was supposed to be up there as well, right? And Utah and all that stuff, right? But right now, like, who is the title favorite in the Western Conference, right? You got the –
Well,
right?
I do know.
Yeah. Who do you have as a title favorite?
I do know, and it comes with an asterisk. If healthy, it's still the Lakers. But like I said last week, we cannot assume that any team, whether it's the Lakers, Brooklyn, or any other team that has gone through injuries or guys in and out of the lineup, are all of a sudden going to flip the switch and be healthy, right? It's one thing to get hot. It's another thing to get healthy. Like that's two different things.
Yeah.
And listen, any team over the last, decade and a half that has had LeBron James, you basically don't bet against it, right? But what has LeBron James been over that span that he's played? Healthy.
Yeah.
Right? Now, all of a sudden, LeBron James has a bum ankle. He's missed tonight. I think tonight's game or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think he's going to miss the next 3 games or whatever the heck it is. He came out and said what the other day, he's never going to be 100%. I started off with calling bullshit on that, but then I'm like, wait a minute. If he is consistently in the playoffs and playing 82 games and this and that, he actually may not be exaggerating in that. But again, you still have AD. He's got to get healthy. He had a sort of a better game the other day. If they can load manage LeBron James, get him healthy or whatever, as healthy as he can be, I'll take a LeBron James at 80% over any other guy at 100%, just based on what he can do. The Lakers also play deep, right?
Yeah.
They're a top 5 team on defense. And you can always hang your hat on defense, right? Defense will keep you in games and help you win games. And you still have arguably the top 10 best players in the world, period. Like we just talked about Russell Westbrook being second all time in point guards. I mean, you're talking about 2 of the best players of all time, like in the league right now.
Yeah.
Period. The Lakers are still, to me, the favorite, if healthy. After that, you made a very good point. It's wide open. Your Phoenix Suns scare me. If I'm anybody in the West, I think Ayton doesn't get the credit he deserves. You talk about Booker. You talk about Christopher Paul, Mr. MVP, who had less points than Kyle Lowry last year. But anyway, you talk about Payne. You talk about this team is really good, and they can play either way. But this team is a problem. The Utah Jazz, I don't know what we're gonna get. I honestly don't. The Denver Nuggets are being basically carried by one guy right now. The guy who should win the MVP. The Clippers, I don't know who they are. The other day, I watched that Raptors game from beginning to end. I'm telling you right now, Kawhi was on the floor. Your boy PG, 13 was on the floor. The Rat was on the floor. Like, they had a full lineup other than Ibaka. I wasn't impressed. The Raptors took it to them. The only reason the Raptors didn't win that game is because they can't close.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Right? And the Raptors were basically playing their 905 team. Like, I don't know what the deal is with the Clippers that they only get up for the Lakers. But if that's the case, they need to be very careful. I don't trust the Clippers at any juncture right now. Even with Kawhi. I trust Kawhi, but the parts around him, I don't know. And then everything else up in the air. They're playing this, and then the Golden State Warriors, you get them in a one-game showdown. They can get in because Steph Curry can drop 70 on you. Everybody else is sort of in there in the mix. I don't know if there's an actual favorite. I trust the Lakers more than I trust anybody else. And then Phoenix is right there, in my opinion, as a team that is a dangerous team. And then, of course, Luka and them boys. I just don't know if the pieces are there for Luka to be supported. He can carry a team, but maybe one round.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we know the Lakers are still going to be there when the playoffs come around. And I think a lot of people aren't really realizing the fact that the Lakers played 3/4 of a season last year. We're one of the best teams in the Western Conference. Then the pandemic hit. Yeah. Then they went into the bubble, won that, then had a 2-month turnaround before they had to get back and start playing again. So they've played a lot of games in a short amount of time. Right, and
72 days off to be exact, right?
Right, and you're not talking about light games. You're talking about intense, hard-fought playoff games, heavy minutes, right? Heavy minutes. So that does take a toll, especially on a guy like LeBron James, who is 35 plus, right? It's not a guy that it's not a younger guy that doesn't got the lumps, that hasn't played the game for that long, right? So obviously, I think a lot of it has to do with what you said. I think a lot of it has to do with load management. They're just getting him ready for the playoffs, getting him ready. You know what? Don't push it back at the end of the day. And we'll get into a little bit of the thing because maybe they might have to push him back because right now they're on a slippery slope that could be in a play-in game. So we'll get into that a little bit and LeBron James comments on that. But I think obviously if you're looking at title favorites, you got to go with the Phoenix Suns, in my opinion, in terms of not title favorites, but the best team in the Western Conference right now. Yeah, they're one game back of Utah. Utah's taken over that lead again, but they've been the most consistent team. They've been good both on the road and at home. They're good both defensively this season and offensively. And like you said,
and since the bubble, don't forget that's carried over. There has been no drop off. As a matter of fact, it's been ascending, right? And to me, people are starting to I think a lot of people coming into the season, sorry to cut you off, were assuming that the bubble was, no pun intended, about to burst, right? And it hasn't. And yes, Chris Paul has made a difference, but the growth of, and I keep saying this, Ayton, Booker is one of the best players in the league, right? And the pieces around them, right? They have some veteran pieces around there and this and that. And coaching matters. And I am a huge fan of Monty Williams. I think he is an underrated coach, if there's such thing. They're on the way up, and they've been on the way up since that bubble, man. Like, that bubble was no fluke. That bubble was no, like, we're cute, we're here to just kind of just look good, and then we'll just figure it out next year. Nah, man, there was something going on with this team, and they just got better and better, and that's why I said they are a problem. Now, to your point, if they're title favorites, I don't know. They are the best team, in my opinion, right now, playing in the Western Conference, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you got to look at the team. I think James Jones should be winning executive of the year. I mean, the moves that they made in the offseason have paid off immensely, paid dividends like tenfold, right? You added Chris Paul, who's been a key piece for the Phoenix Suns. He's in the MVP talk, right? You got Devin Booker, who's playing very, very good basketball again. DeAndre Ayton has taken a step forward in his career in terms of his abilities, and he's taken a step forward. Bringing in Jay Crowder and his toughness on defense has played huge. You've got they made a nice trade acquisition there at the deadline that nobody really talked about, right? They've made key moves, made under the radar moves in terms of getting them into position to be a solid team. And then you got Coach Monty Williams, who has gotten the best out of the squad, right? So I think they're, in my opinion, right now they might be the favorites, but it's like a slim favorite. I mean, you still got Utah, you still got the Clippers. The Clippers still have Kawhi Leonard. I mean, Kawhi Leonard, whether they go into the playoffs and play like they did in the bubble, that's a different story. But Kawhi Leonard is Kawhi Leonard. He always steps up in the playoffs when it matters most, right?
There's no problem with him. To me, it's the rest of the team.
Exactly.
At this point, now Ibaka might be the wild card because Ibaka has been there, done that, right? And they're going to need him, especially if they run into the Lakers, whether it's first round, second round, whatever it is in the hallway series. I just, at this point, I don't know if I should, like, they seem a little bit too high themselves. Like, Kawhi is the great equalizer, right? It's like whatever deficits you have, he kind of just makes it all good.
Yeah.
People who watched the Raptors that year, 2019, they saw what he can do, right?
Yeah.
We've seen what he can do in San Antonio. So, but there's that trust factor, right, with the rest of that team. So we'll see what happens. The West is going to be so compelling, man.
Yeah, it's going to be a dogfight.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Every night is going to be just because you can literally make an argument for 1 through 6 on why they can win a championship.
Yeah, I mean,
why they can get to the Western Finals at least.
Yeah, I think there's only one team that, unfortunately, I think that they're doing well right now, and ever since the injury, Nikola Jokic and Michael Porter Jr. have played exceptional basketball, and the Denver Nuggets have won games. But I mean, when it comes down to the playoffs, team defense gets 10 times better. Right? Yeah. And when you're going when Nikola Jokic is going to be going up against Andre Drummond and Anthony Davis every single night, right?
That's the difference.
Right?
Yeah.
That's going to be a huge difference because they're going to hone on him and they're going to rely on Michael Porter Jr., Dozier. They're going to rely on a lot of those guys to step up. And you don't have a guy like Jamal Murray. That could play a huge factor in the Denver Nuggets not making it past the first or second round, right?
Right. That's when we see Jamal Murray's absence.
Yeah. So before we end this podcast off, the other day, Mr. LeBron James decided he was going to make a statement about the play-in game, right? Right now the Los Angeles Lakers are 6th in the Western Conference, a half game up on the Portland Trail Blazers, right? So they're right on that cusp of that play-in spot, right? So LeBron James basically said he hates it, and he said whoever came up with it should be fired, right? I mean,
Yep.
But my thing is where the hell was this 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks ago, or 8 weeks ago, even longer than that, when the Los Angeles Lakers were 3rd or 2nd or 1st in the Western Conference? Nowhere to be seen, nowhere to be heard, because they weren't afraid of playing in that play-in game. Now it's like, okay, well, we're in the playoff game. I don't like it because now we're not going to make the playoffs. We possibly couldn't make the playoffs. Well, sorry, that's how the cookie crumbles. You're not the only team that has dealt with injuries. You're not the only team that has dealt with COVID. You're not the only team that is playing 72 games this season. So, right? So this is what was implemented in the season. This is the way it's going to go. And crying about it isn't going to change the fact that your team is struggling right now. You're hurt. Anthony Davis is hurt and might not be 100% healthy. So it's not going to change the fact that you might be playing in a play-in game in a few weeks' time. Right. So I want to, what's your take on this the LeBron James comment, right? We also had Luka Doncic make those same comments earlier on in the season, right? When Dallas was thing, and look where they are.
Right.
5th in the Western Conference, right? A half game out of 7th.
I said this last podcast, and I think, like I said, and I'll get to LeBron in 1 second because it leads up to that. The play-in game only benefits you when it's convenient with regards to your market, right? So if you have been a team that has never been in this position, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
If you're a team like Charlotte Hornets that are, sort of in that, regardless of what happens, are going to get an opportunity to get in, then sure. The Lakers, in LeBron's eyes, should not have the opportunity to get in. They should be in, period.
Yeah.
Now, I've defended LeBron James way too long for my liking, and I think I'm going to just do it for one last time. They also asked him this question after getting their butts kicked by the Toronto Raptors, correct?
Yeah.
So they asked him when he was mad pissed. I think that if he looks at this from a different angle, he probably doesn't answer the question the same way he did.
Yeah.
In saying this, his voice is so powerful that I can almost be willing to bet you, and even though we had this conversation in the last podcast, I'm willing to bet you that this is the last year we see the play.
Yeah.
If LeBron James and others are talking about this is sort of BS, it ain't gonna happen, because the NBA is the one league that always listens to what the stars are saying, and they're like, okay, we're gonna make a change.
Yeah.
If it ain't working for you, now the only thing that may prevent them from this is this, right? Wu-Tang Clan, cash rules, everything around me, right? So if it don't make dollar, it don't make sense, then they'll take it out.
Yeah.
But if it does, then LeBron James, like, thanks for your contributions for saying it, but we're gonna keep it in. By the way, blame your team for not keeping you guys afloat while you were gone. Because at the end of the day, if you really think, just remove the emotions for 1 second and the bias, and I am trying my best to do so, this is not LeBron's problem. This is Frank Vogel's problem. This is KCP's problem. This is Kyle Kuzma's problem. Marc Gasol has been basically a shell of his former self that he was 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
They've been a below 500 team since they've been gone. And yes, let's not kid ourselves. Missing Anthony Davis and LeBron James, any team would struggle.
Yeah.
Duh. No shit, Sherlock. But at the same time, you got to do what you need to do. And also maybe not adding a certain, point guard from a certain city in Canada that you could have had for another guy. Maybe that doesn't, help your cause in your argument. But You remove that aside, it's not like we're talking about a slouch team. This team is pretty good. Your defense has basically kept you in the season. So if you now have fallen off and you have to get into a play-in game situation, you're the best player in the world. Just go ahead and do it, man. Simple as that.
Yeah, I agree.
You're tired. It is what it is. You ain't. It's not like you're George Springer, man. You ain't talking about leg fatigue, right? Shout out to George Springer. I like the guy. Don't get me wrong, right? No, I'm not shitting on him. I'm just saying he's the only. That's another podcast. Load management guy in baseball, but listen,